views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on another episode of Meetings of the Minds in partnership with BronxNet Television. This segment is very special to me. We have Reverend Jacques DeGraff, a well-known social activist and the associate pastor of the historic Canaan Baptist Church in Harlem. These are just a couple of titles to describe Rev DeGraff. We know him as a friend. Rev has been instrumental on building a bridge between the African American communities and the Hispanic community. He is the co-chair of New York Friends of Puerto Rico, and through that organization, we partner for a trade mission in Puerto Rico. With the leadership of Rev, our chamber, the New York City Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, became a part of a team that pushed for Article 15A that extended the opportunities for minority and women-owned business procurement law until 2023. He is a man that I look up to. He is an example to all of us. He has been in the fight and the struggle and have overcome many challenges and continues to teach us how to do so. Rev, welcome. How are you?
Thank you. I finally made it back to the Bronx.
All right, the VX is in the house. Thank you so much for being with us. You know you are a man that I look up to. You are one of those individuals that is just better to listen to you and to heed what you say and to follow through on it. So thank you so much for being with us. Our particular goal with this episode of Meetings with the Minds is gonna be to discuss diversity and inclusion and how Latinos can build a better alliance with the African American community. So who best to speak about that than you? We have a couple of questions. Let me know when you're ready and we can start.
I came ready, and before we get started, I just want to say that one of the problems that leadership has had in oppressed communities has been passing the baton of leadership. And so Sulma, you are tan, rested, and ready, and you have been a gift to both communities. And so I'm here today as one is for the debt that we owe for you to being ready, for the way you hold high the banner, and the way we work together for the cause of progress.
Thank you so much, Rev. Really appreciate those words. Our first question, Rev, I want to clarify, what is the difference between affirmative action and diversity and inclusion?
Well, both of them have goals of progress for the participation of those who have been locked out. Affirmative action in the courts was, which started back when Nixon was president, was originally a race-based solution. And it has been found, race-based solutions have been found illegal, unconstitutional under the courts. So even though that they brought in many businesses and individuals into firms and opportunities, they were found illegal. So diversity is the evolutionary child of affirmative action. And diversity pivots on, it's not mandated, it's the initiative of the institution or individuals. Diversity, first of all, is broader than race. It can include gender. It can include other criteria like a service-disabled veteran, things of that nature. But diversity really speaks to the larger aspiration of society. What do we want to look like? So many of us have been locked out of public images, locked out of the history curriculum, locked out of America, the mainstream of American life. So diversity seeks to make America live up to its promise and include all of its citizens. The inclusion part, diversity basically speaks to the breadth of the elements of that inclusion. And inclusion means that it ought not be mandated just in law or policy. People ought to sometimes look around the room and say, hey, where is? How come we don't have any? How can we build bridges to? And so it's not only in government and institutions, it's in our daily lives. And it's what fuels, I think, the consciousness of this moment.
Mm-hmm. Why do you believe we constantly have to, have these terms like diversity and inclusion, like affirmative action, just to get a space in this greater plan for communities of colors like ourselves, and not just based on qualification? Why are these terms so important?
Well, I think we have to raise the consciousness. The latest term is stay woke, is because many folk, when it comes to diversity and inclusion, have not been woke. They've been asleep. That's the kindest way we can put it sometimes. There have been folks who have been actively excluding others, but there have also been others who enjoyed white privilege and were really unaware of it. And we're in a moment of national awakening that George Floyd's death has brought about. A lot of things now have come to the surface out of one particular incident, and people saying, I didn't know that. And now we find that we have as many white activists now who are trying to redress past wrongs. It's a very exciting time in America, but it's also a time that you better fasten your seatbelts, because status quo doesn't go down easily. And so we're in a time when America seems to be in conflict with itself. But as a woman who's given birth, you know that even good things have to go through pain. Childbirth involves pain, and the new America is going to be a painful process, but it's a necessary process.
You mentioned the new America is going to be a painful process. It is a necessary process. You have been instrumental, even as the co-chair of Friends in Puerto Rico, on being that bridge for the African American community and the Latino community. How can we unite and ensure that we can move forward together as one?
Well, one of the things that we have to do is stop tiptoeing around certain sensitive areas. Both of our communities have colorism issues. Both of our communities have sometimes turf issues. And we need to be able to be candid and talk about that. And we also need to be mindful and respectful to say that if we're going to be together, I don't have to surrender my identity to be with you. And you ought not have to sublimate your heritage to be with us. And so once we have that mutual recognition and respect, and then identify common ground, because we're both locked out of the same door. And,
right.
And that's the most important thing, number one. And number two is that the synergy of our cultures are so important. And as you know, and you have been talking about understanding Garafinas, I think it's important that we understand each culture. We're not a monolithic. Neither community is monolithic. Latinos are not monolithic. Blacks are not monolithic. And we have a rich culture, which when we combine and have cross-cultural experiences, the world is better for it. And so I think this is a very, very important time in American history that we bind ourselves together and move forward together. And there are people in each of our community who are nationalists for our ethnic groups. And they will say, well, why are you with them? And you should be with your own. But I think the way of the world, and I think God's message is that we're all his creation. And so while, yes, we can respect each flavor in the gumbo, that we all together make up a tapestry that is rich and is rainbow-like in quality.
How do you think we should, I guess, work together to start having these open conversations with one another? Like, when is the right time? What is the right platform? Because we do have to start understanding each other, and seeing where we each come from, what our cultures, because when we speak about that, we find so much more in common than we do difference from one another.
Well, one thing I think we have to do is recognize that we, in many instances, have been pitted against one another.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily innate, but it was the advantage of some to pit us against one another. And sometimes it was around resources. And so we found that we thought that the pie only could accommodate either or instead of both. And the reality is when we are in communication, when we have respect, and when we take the time to listen to each other. And where do we do that? We do that in our cultures. We do that through music. We do that through the arts. We do that through literature. And when we can get an appreciation and recognize the humanity of one another, and then we can grow together. It's harder to be against somebody who you know their children, you know how they cook, you know the food that they like, when you have shared some experiences together. And that means that we have to be open enough to try new experiences. When we started the New York Friends of Puerto Rico, people looked at me and asked the question, well, he's not Puerto Rican. No, my father lived in Puerto Rico for a number of years and spoke Spanish, but the issue was that he cares about Puerto Rico. And so rather than look at this, Bible would say, rather than look at the surface, God looks at our heart. And we've got to put our hearts together, because these times right now, they are life and death times. Everybody's not going to make it out. The health of our communities are challenged. The finances, we are about to face an economic tsunami. And our businesses, many of our businesses will perish. Some of our churches and some of our other institutions, beloved, will perish. And so we've got to stand together right now and pass the test of unity.
Mm-hmm. You have been instrumental in opening so many doors with elected officials, governor, commissioners, just business as a whole. How do we translate who we are, in these particular spaces and educate them on the fact that we need the equity in these spaces?
Well, one of the things I learned, I served on the Nielsen Company's advisory board for 10 years. And Nielsen, as you know, has the largest database of consumer affairs in the world. They don't just measure TV ratings, they measure buying habits, consumerism across the country in about 160 countries. And so learning about that, I learned a great deal during that time. And one of the things I learned in trying to communicate with them is when we talk about our mutual interests, how we can make money together if we're in business, that diversity is good for business. The whole notion that we are each separate silos, well, we've got to push past that. And again, there are those in our communities and outside of our community who prosper when we're divided.
What should we as a collective be asking for?
Well, I think, the Black Lives Matter movement sounds, people can make it more complicated than it is. But the first thing we want to be is recognized as human beings. If when we look at police misconduct issues, we say that if a mother calls the police because her emotionally disturbed son or daughter is acting up, they didn't call the police to shoot their son or daughter. And the police person has a son or a daughter, a neighbor, or a cousin, someone in their family who is troubled, and they would never shoot them. But when they don't see our humanity, then they're free to act in the ways that they have done. And so we need to be able to communicate our humanity, the values of our life, and part of that, parenthetically, is that we need to live that. It's hard to tell the police that Black Lives Matter when 70 of us go out on a weekend and shoot each other.
Right.
So we've got some work to do, and it's an excellent point to raise, because we're really talking, and the good news, the moment, this historic moment, this COVID moment is transforming America. Just like 9/11 said, after 9/11, the way we travel changed.
Yes.
This COVID moment is going to change the way we relate to one another. We used to think that on Friday night we could go to a play, a club, to where some people went and worship. We could go to a museum, we could hang out. Now we appreciate our relationships. We appreciate how we spend our time. Anyone who has spent the last 3 months confined with their children has a new appreciation of teachers. We say, like, you're in a classroom with 30 people like that, you deserve a raise just because of that. And so when we get to know right now in this moment, we are all pledging that when we get through this moment, we're going to be different. We can't go back the way where we were. And so a lot of things are being revealed in this moment. When we have some of these conversations, that people who had racist attitudes, they weren't members of the Klan, but they had racist attitudes that had been imbued in them that they took as second nature. What do you mean to change the name of the Washington Redskins? I'm not a racist. But now those things, the time has come to change the flag in Mississippi, to change symbols of hate that go generations on. So in this moment, to your very, very excellent point, we need to be intentional about building the new world that we want to live in and that we want our children to live in. So we need to initiate some conversations, even though they might be a little awkward. If we just are passive, we'll go back to where we were. And so what it means for all of us is that we have to be intentional. You have led a conversation, and you found, as I'm sure, in your discussion about hair is part of a woman's identity and how she perceives herself and how she is received. And when she changed her standard of beauty and saying, I'm not going to let somebody else impose their standard of beauty on me, I'm beautiful just the way I am. That's a revolutionary posture. And it's got to like, you got to take me as I am, as I define myself. And we have to start embracing that revolution. It's a revolution of the mind.
Right.
Frederick Douglass said that the freedom for a slave begins when the slave changes his or her mind. Doesn't begin when master said, no, first he's got to say, I'm not staying right here. And so we are now in a revolution of the mind, and it's going to have repercussions across the ages, and it's a very exciting time for us to be together. It
sure is. And when people identify me as, oh, you're part of this movement, and I said, no, I am part of the Back to You revolution. You know, to call this time period a movement, I think it's an understatement. It's a whole revolution. It's a whole new world that we have to be strategic in changing the way we want to see it, the way that makes sense for all of humanity. And since this is our time, with, you know, from your experience, what mistakes, and perhaps you just already answered it, but what mistakes should we avoid, right? Because there's been mistakes through history and we have to learn through it. And during this time that the Black Lives Matter movement, the social justice movement has pretty much acquired over $1.4 billion, you know, and that was just a couple of weeks ago. What mistakes shouldn't we be making?
Well, one of the fundamental mistakes that we can make in the fullness of the moment is to think that my pain, my oppression is superior to everybody else's. That the struggle that I've gone through to get to where I am today is more divine, is more worthy of relief than somebody else's. And so the LGBTQ struggle in America, the struggle of Native Americans, the struggle of immigrants, we can't have a hierarchy of pain. Okay, justice requires that we all come through the gate together. And the reason Black Lives Matter has resonated around the world, because the people in Lebanon are saying, we're supporting Black Lives Matter. People in France are supporting Black Lives Matter, because they realize that they didn't fall into the trap, the pitfall of the word Black. They heard freedom matters, humanity matters. And if we support this moment, it will bring about our own liberation, because we cannot be free as long as somebody else is being oppressed. And it struck a chord with a new generation of folks. When back in the day, during the civil rights movement, people would look at TV and say, see a place like Birmingham, Alabama, and see firemen turn fire hoses on school children. They would see snarling dogs, and they would say, isn't that terrible down there? Because we're not like that, okay? But now we need to recognize that oppression is everywhere, right, and that we've got to call it out everywhere. So the number one thing we've got to do is, one, we've got to support one another's liberation movement, liberation revolution. And one of the things that I and others have been saying is the difference in this moment and in other upheavals in the past is that we've changed. Right. We're not going back. We're not going to allow other people to say that because you passed an issue on the chokehold, that it's done. Right. It's bigger than the chokehold. It's bigger than the budget of the police department. This is a fundamental realignment in America. And therefore, while this is happening, the Latino community, the Black community, we can sit and talk and say things that we've never said before, right? It used to be in New York that when we said Hispanic or we said African American or people of color, they were euphemisms for Blacks and Puerto Ricans. But now every Black person isn't an African American. Every Latino isn't Puerto Rican. We have a multidimensional community, and we look differently. You can't look at somebody anymore and tell where they came from. And so we've got to get beyond the surface and look into our hearts, and then listen to one another, and then be proactive. Sometimes we have to go to another neighborhood and try some different food. Sometimes we've got to change the dial on the radio and listen to some new music. And sometimes we have to listen to people sitting next to us in our classroom, in our church, in our neighborhoods, and start to address the humanity. Because only because those who have lost their humanity can do some of the hateful things that we've been seeing. The woman in Central Park, Amy Cooper, saw a big Black man and put his life at risk by making a false call. And we've seen instances, this policeman looked into a camera and kept his knee on George Floyd's neck for 8 minutes and 40, knowing that he was being photographed. These are terrifying things that say that people have lost their way. And so it's incumbent upon the rest of us to challenge them, to be present, to be persistent, and we're not going to take no for an answer. We're not going to back up. We're not going to back down. We're marching for the new America. We're marching for the new community, and we're marching for our grandchildren and our children to have a new world. And we won't accept anything less.
And neither will we. And this is why these conversations are so important. I consider myself very fortunate to be an Afro-Latina and be the director of operations for the New York City Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, because as you know, the face of a Latina has not quite been like mine or the color of one. So it is my God-given duty and my responsibility to make sure that this bridge continues to be a bridge, and that we can move forward together as a collective, as a force. The issues in the world of my African American brothers and sisters are the same issues in the world of my Latino brothers and sisters. But the only way we can get this new America that we want to see is to be in the struggle and the fight together. And the goal is always to see one another as human beings, as you said, and whatever it is that we have to do, Rev, we are here. Please continue to make sure we're in partnership and help us build this bridge. I know that if it benefits the Latino community, it will benefit the African American community, and vice versa. But we have to request that equity with respect for one another, number one, and the ultimate goal, again, is a better America. So I'm with you on that. I thank you so much for your brotherhood, for your love, and for your support through all of it.
Sulma, man, let me just say one thing that I think is really critical as we close, and that is this: anger is not enough. We were angry when we saw children in cages, and we were angry for a period, and then we got over it. We were angry when there was a nightclub shooting of gays. We were angry when babies were shot in Connecticut. We were angry when Muslims were stopped at the airport, and then we got over it. And so with all the righteousness that's going on in the streets right now, we can't go back to sleep. We cannot go back to sleep. So I'm closing on the note of let's stay woke together.
We have to stay woke. We have to stay woke, and we will, as long as we continue to keep these conversations open and put action behind us. You're absolutely right, Rev. Again, thank you so much for being with us. You know, I appreciate your time always. I'm so grateful for this opportunity. Again, you are our brothers. You are familia for always. So,
mi hermana.
Mi hermana. Thank you so much.
Keep up the great work that you are doing.